recording?
Yep, I see it.
Okay, so fire away then.
All right.
Alabama. Alabama. Arkansas.
Brett Leach.
Illinois. Doug McLean. Indiana.
Adam Phelps.
Iowa.
Orrin Jones.
Kentucky.
John Brunges.
Louisiana. Manitoba.
Jillian St. George.
Michigan.
Barbara Avers.
Minnesota.
Haydock.
Mississippi.
Houston Havens.
Missouri.
Reed Vigut.
Ohio. Ontario.
Rod Brook.
Saskatchewan. Tennessee. Wisconsin.
Taylor Finger.
Canadian Wildlife Service. U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service.
Dave Scott.
Bird Banding Laboratory. USDA APHIS Wildlife Services. USG.
Okay. Thanks, Doug. So we'll begin by going around for introductions. I'll begin for Iowa. Very pleased to have Taylor Ballard on, representing our waterfowl program a little later in the agenda. Anybody else? Barb.
Yeah, hi everybody. I wanted to introduce Caitlin Barnes with Michigan DNR. She is going to be the acting waterfowl specialist for the next few months. So please include her on your communication, and she should be down in Orange Beach in February. Hopefully I'll be able to come along with her, but just wanted to introduce her. Thanks.
Great. Thanks, Barb. Welcome, Caitlin.
Louisiana has Owen
introductions?
Best.
Owen. Okay. Hey, Owen. Thanks for coming.
Hey guys, this is Drew Fowler with the Louisiana Co-op Unit.
Drew, thanks for coming.
Bruce
Hey,
Davis
Paul
is also
Wickert.
here from Minnesota.
Illinois has Sam Klimas, our waterfowl project manager, and Josh Osborne from the Forbes Biological Station.
Fish and Wildlife Service also has Pam Garrettson.
I think I saw the great Ray Alasauskas sneak in there in the background. Good to see Ray for a change.
Shh. I'll be quiet.
Nick
Hi,
Master
everyone.
is here from Happett.
All right. Any other introductions?
Hey guys, I think I missed roll call, but Jamie Federson for Tennessee.
Hey, Jamie. Thanks for catching us. Okay, so I think we'll jump right in. At least here in Iowa, we're experiencing a pretty severe outbreak of avian influenza. It's really kind of turned my world upside down for the last 2 weeks. And our email chain indicated that many other states are experiencing similar outbreaks. And so I thought, just as an update, I asked Dr. Stalneck if he would provide an overview of what's going on, so that perhaps we can have more informed responses locally. Dave, are you with us?
Yeah, I am. And
Okay.
I don't have a presentation or anything. I was just going to kind of summarize what we're seeing and throw in some opinions like I always do for you guys to consider. I've got this broken down into like 3 sections. First, ducks. The second, geese. That seem to be kind of very different scenarios going on between the two groups. And I think I wanted to just touch upon some of the human cases that we have, just to put them into perspective a little bit. For again, just to give you something to think about. That's all. Not fear, but something to think about. So let's start with ducks. And I think we've have presented our data from the Mississippi Flyway pretty much every meeting. So you're real familiar with what we're doing. So I'm not going to rehash it. Basically, sort of what we look at is early migration in Minnesota, in Louisiana, fall migration and wintering in Louisiana and Texas, and then spring migration in Louisiana. And we've been doing this for years, and it's a very set thing. And it's a lot of virus isolation coupled with serology. And the serology has really been the critical component of this to kind of help us understand it. Without it, we really would be lost in trying to explain the patterns that we're seeing. So a little bit about what we saw this year. In Minnesota, and actually we include it in this, the South Dakota and North Dakota also, we did not get a single high path isolate, okay? If we looked at the serology, what we found is that about 50% of the adult cohort had antibodies to H5 and N1, which we expected due to the previous year's exposure. The juveniles were completely naive for H5 and N1. There was actually no indication that they had seen that virus prior to that time. So that was the same in the northern areas and also in Louisiana and early migrating blue-winged teal. Not a single isolate. We didn't do serology down there. We just do hunter kill stuff, but no isolations down there at all. Okay. So following that, Paul called us and he was seeing some waterfowl affected by flu on Louisiana, and there have been some cases. There have been some isolates made from these birds. What's interesting with that is that we picked up isolates. But what's interesting in that is what happened this year, what it looks like happened. No early exposure. But as they were coming down the flyway, it started creeping in. And basically what you got is a later season. You got from the serology and everything else, it looks like October, November is when really they were hit with infection, what wasn't hit before. And it's funny, the year before, this is really similar to what we saw in year 2. In year 2, we didn't get anything from the staging areas. Nothing. I think we got one from a hunter kill bird down there. But again, serology told us that we just missed it. We didn't get the isolates, but it went through that population, and it looked like the same time span. So no isolates in September, but when we do serology in October, November, everything basically is seroconverted. They have seen the virus through that thing. So what it looks like, it's really following. We just had a manuscript published on this. What it looks like is that it's following the same seasonal patterns as what we see with low path viruses. Okay, and with low path though, it's actually even more interesting than that. With the old low path seasonal thing, we basically got a lot of H3s and H4s on the staging grounds, but not much H5. And the H5 came later in the season, more on the wintering grounds. And it seems like that's the same pattern we've seen in the last 2 years. Whether it'll hold or not, I don't know. The one thing that has been consistent, though, is spring. And other than that first spring when it was first introduced, we're seeing absolutely nothing on spring migrating blue-winged teal in Louisiana. Serologically, every single one of them almost has antibodies and has been exposed already. So this actually has some, hopefully I'll remember to talk about that when we're talking about the human cases and risk and that sort of thing later on. But long story short, the one thing that's different about this virus than all the low path viruses is the intensity of infection that we see. When it gets into a population, it sweeps through. I mean, absolutely. We saw this in Tennessee during the first introduction, and we saw it in the first fall staging thing in Minnesota. Really high incidence of infection. It just really rips through, and I think it rips through pretty quickly on there. The other thing is that we're seeing a very predictive seasonal pattern, and this is a good thing because what this will do, it allows us to try to find virus where we're most likely to find it. It helps explain mortality, and it also will help inform the public and people working with the birds, whether it's a time of year where you seldom see it or it's often. It's not, we can't be 100% on it, but we can give a relative idea of risk associated with that. So that's sort of the duck situation that we've seen this year. And, you know, we'll probably continue. This is really interesting. We'll probably continue with this forever if we can, if we can with your help. But it's pretty interesting. I think in the long term, it'll give us the information to be able to explain why all this is happening, which is really kind of important. Okay, let's get in geese, and I'm gonna scratch my head a lot with geese because this is a tough one. But if you actually look at mortality reported on the USDA website, what you'll see is an overabundance of goose species on there. Cacklers primarily, snow geese probably number one, and quite a lot of Canada geese. And the one thing I think we need to kind of sort out with the Canada geese is, are these resident geese? Or are they migratory geese? Because we've done some work in the past. Like we've got a resident population in Georgia. Those birds have not seen flu. The migratory ones have. So it may make a big difference on it. The Canada goose obviously is just not a Canada goose when it comes down to this. But there's a lot of them on that list. What we're doing right now, we're kind of snowed under with goose submissions, mainly Rosses and snow geese from numerous states, Kansas, Louisiana, and others, many others. And I want to really talk about what we can and cannot do. The one thing, we're getting a lot of cases, a lot of samples for H5 confirmation, and that is a good thing. We're glad you send those, but we don't need to overdo this, okay? If you do 5 geese in your state and they're all positive or 4 out of 5 positive, you've kind of answered your question. And I bring this up, it's not that we don't like working, but we have to incinerate all these carcasses and it just costs a ton of money to do all this, and then shipping and everything else. So if you want to send, if you have a specific question and you want to send carcasses, just contact us and we can figure out how to advise you on how to do that. And there's a lot of different options here on validation. And the other thing is serology. We're not going to be able to really figure out what's going on in geese without some serum samples. And I know they're tough to capture at times. And we got some things lined up, but the more samples we can get and do in serology, actually, the better off we're going to be and the better we're going to understand these things. So a little bit about how to approach this in your state. And these are pure suggestions because I know you're all understaffed, you're all overwhelmed. It's the holidays, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But these are some things to think about, okay? And I'm just throwing them out there, not to tell you what to do, but just to think about. And the first thing is we need to understand the mortality patterns. The limited serology that we've done so far, when it came through 2 years ago in the Midwest, it came through like it did in ducks. I mean, really just everything was infected, really ripped through. And there was a good deal of geese that survived and a good deal of population immunity to that. Okay, when you see that pattern, you can immediately kind of look at, well, next year, the cohort that will be affected are the hatchet year birds. They're the ones that are probably going to be susceptible, as with the ducks. So when you're doing any kind of mortality type stuff, make sure, waterfowl biologists, I don't have to tell this to, but veterinarians sometimes, but get those ages. I mean, it really kind of helps validate that we're on the right track and really understanding the patterns. The one thing that has eluded us, and this is not a goose problem, this is a bird problem. When we get mortality, is getting mortality estimates. This is not an easy thing to do, but if you can figure out a way to, and some innovation is needed here, I think, but figure out a way to kind of even get some rough estimates of the mortality, it will really help. And the thing about that is we have serology on that, We will also be able to get a rough estimate, not a precise estimate, but a rough estimate of survivorship too, which is also another important thing to look at. Okay, and finally, and I don't know what you have or what you can do with this, but you know, you have sort of population indices and that sort of thing, population estimates, maybe recruitment estimates, et cetera, whatever you have. If one of those could be, you know, affected by mortality in a year, you might want to look at it and see if there's anything. If there's a blip or anything going on there that is detectable. Because if there isn't, this may not be a lot of mortality, but it may not be the problem that we see. And I think it's just something y'all can do. We can't help you with that. And I don't really know what is possible or not, but think it again. Just sort of think about it. And finally, I'll just be real brief here. We can open it up for questions if you want. But on the human health side of this thing, in the past, you know, we pretty much said, you know, this is not right now. CDC is saying this is an unlikely scenario for human exposure via waterfowl. It's low risk, and it still is. Okay, even with the human cases, they're still saying this, and this is a good thing. But I'm afraid with hitting the press and seeing the cattle thing and everything, it's going to become more of an issue for y'all and for us too, which is kind of scary. So here's some things to think about. The two cases that they've had, the one in Missouri is not associated with waterfowl. They don't know what is associated with, okay? But they had an H5 case in Missouri. It's not associated with cattle or chickens, okay? The one thing about that case that struck me is that it is also I don't know if it's an immune compromised person, but they had some other medical issues associated with that. And that has been very characteristic of the human cases. The one they had in South America 2 years ago was the same scenario, okay? So there may be some other morbidity factors that actually make you more susceptible to that. And that right now with that case, I don't think there's any indication, no connection with wild birds either. The most recent one in Louisiana is a little different. That person was with a sick waterfowl or dead waterfowl, okay? And that's not really setting any precedent. The first human case, and up to this point, the only human case that was associated with bird working with or contact with wild birds was someone who was processing some swans in Russia or something very early in the situation in a closed area. Okay, so that's it. It's still low risk, but it should be in the back of your minds, and it may get worse. People have a tendency these days on public health to sort of jump to conclusions and maybe overreact to this. These cases are hospitalized, but I want to just throw something else out. And it may be that some of the hospitalization is not due to severe disease, but to the need for isolation. And they never specify that, but that's very different reason to put someone in the hospital. Okay, so just, again, keep it in the back of your mind. As far as what might be coming down the pipe or what you guys can think about is PPE. And if anyone who's worked with us in the field know that we do not use PPE. We wash our hands. We're very aware, and we wear eye protection, and we're very aware that we don't stick our fingers in our mouth and wash our hands and not stick our hands in our face, et cetera, et cetera. But there's really some simple things you can do if you get concerned, and that's number one, you can wear a face mask, okay? And I think we're kind of used to doing that, and that would probably solve the aerosol situation right there. The other thing you can do is, again, hand washing is important. I prefer hand washing over gloves. Most people don't, but in my opinion, gloves just give you a artificial idea of the amount of protection you really have. You'll rub the glove in your eye. because you got gloves on. And the other thing is just a lot of people, I know a lot of the feds will use, coveralls. The white coveralls that you get are I've found them, they make excellent camouflage when you're hunting in snow. So it's a little good thing to use. But you might want to consider, think about those and have a source if you run into problems. The other thing that I think might help is, I know in a lot of the banding things I've been to, you invite groups of people there, the public, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We can't tell you during certain times of the year whether that's a good thing or a bad thing. You may have flu, we can't tell you. I mean, it's just, locally, this is hit or miss. But what we seem to be able to tell you now, based on what data we have, that if you would basically orient these to the spring or late winter, you'd be a lot safer. Okay? And maybe you should just think about having seasonal invites rather than, during the early season or that sort of thing. And then the other thing that I harp on this all the time, but the one area that I think we can really run into some issues with this, especially if you hit it's mainly with the public, not with y'all, but the way we process ducks a lot of times in these processing sheds, man, I look at that, and that is, if you had a bunch of ducks coming in there with flu in a confined space, and you're plucking them with an automatic feather plucker, and et cetera, et cetera, I would consider that high risk right there, and I'd be concerned about that. But anyway, if you see it, you might want to just mention it to the people that maybe you should put a face mask on or something, something along those lines. Anyway, that's really all I have. I thought I would leave it open for you guys to ask the questions that you need to know and see if I can answer those, if that's okay.
That sounds good. Thank you very much, Dave. Questions for Dave? Bruce Davis, go ahead. Hey, Bruce, I see you got your hand up. Go ahead.
Sorry, I left myself muted. Thanks for all that information, Dave. That's really good information on geese. Is there any advantage or any need for sampling those birds in the summer while we're banding, or all during the fall?
No, anytime we get actually different pictures during the different seasons, and actually summer banding, summer samples would be fantastic, because that's what we don't have on geese right now, and that's where we could really look at the population immunity in the adults versus the hatch year birds, and sort of get an idea. And the hatch year birds are pretty easy to say. They either have it or they don't. So they're going to be susceptible. They may be susceptible every year. What we don't know is what the prevalence or what the population immunity in the adult group, how that varies between years, or how that may drive an outbreak. Because it seems kind of funny. I think what's going to happen is we're going to see these cyclic things. We got 3 years to base this on, but 2 years ago we had an outbreak. Probably had a lot of population immunity, not much the next year, and then all of a sudden this year we're having another outbreak. And I think it may give us an idea of and that's one option. We'll have the cyclic thing. The other thing we're seeing in ducks, and actually waterfowl in general, is that we still have it, and we have it every year. There's tons of bias in the data, and I'll be the first to acknowledge that, but it looks like it's not as bad. It's sort of, the peaks are kind of going down. It's still there, but the intensity of the outbreaks is lower, and that could be explained partially by just by the population immunity in that adult cohort, both ducks and in geese. And then you throw on top of that, annual recruitment varies a lot every year, and how that might influence what you see during the winter too. You know, you may have years where the hatch-year cohort is huge compared to other years. So there's a lot of things I think we can look at that they're not going to solve the problem. They're not going to prevent it, but it can help you be on top of it before it gets to you, which I think would be helpful. I hope it would be helpful.
Okay, thanks.
Hey, maybe Rod can comment on it, but I believe Chris Sharp gave us a presentation. They sampled all of their, I think, almost 1,000 Canada geese during banding, and they didn't come across, I think, a single case of HPAI during their banding operations. So, but yeah, I'm just providing. I think we had one of our folks actually do that, right?
That's been our experience too with low path. And what that was that summer banding?
I think correct, right, Rod?
Yeah, in July.
Yeah, and that's what we've always seen with low path too. And I think what goes on there, and I guess just thinking about it, the spring has always been a time where prevalence has been low. The adults, Canada geese adults, generally are if they are going to have some immunity, and the hatch years haven't seen it yet. So it's a timing thing. And this typically with all waterfowl species and geese, that those spring samples don't yield a lot. If you move on to other species, if you move on to gulls and shorebirds, the spring's the time. So it's a kind of a different scenario. But that's what I was getting at is you know, you can sort of gauge risk a little bit. You can't say you're not going to get a bird that's positive. It's impossible ever to say that. But you can probably say it's really super unlikely that a lot of them, if any of them, will be infected.
Why do geese seem to be more severely affected by this particular strain, whereas previously they didn't seem to be affected at all?
That's a $10 million question, and I don't know. But the same scenario has been going on in Europe. The same thing with barnacle geese, and I have no earthly idea. And whether it relates to something associated that maybe something different in a goose than a duck, I don't know. But there's definitely there's you can't lump them. There's no question about it. You can't lump them. And anyway, and the other thing about it, there is one thing that may make a difference, and I don't know if it does or not, but there's a lot of partial immunity associated with flu. And ducks in general get hit. If they don't get hit with high path, they're getting hit with low path during staging. So they may come down in the wintertime with basically some degree of protection, along with just being naturally, innately a little bit more protected. Whereas geese may come down a little later. They may not get that hit of low path to kind of get things moving, especially the hatch year. And they may come down more susceptible and more immune, naive than those. But that's just a theory. That is just purely a theory. But they're seeing the same pattern, exact same pattern in Europe, and hitting at the same exact time, sort of that November, sort of a little later. I mean, it's really similar.
Any additional questions? Go ahead, Barb.
Yeah, actually, thank you, Dr. Stalnick. It's more of a question, I think, for the states that are experiencing some of these die-offs. I'm just curious, have you guys tried to do any outreach to your, late season hunters here and kind of raising that awareness? And just curious, if so, if that's something that can be shared with the other states.
Good question. We in Iowa have not. We have a general press release that went out to our hunter email list that directed hunters to stay away from sick and dead birds and to keep their dogs away from sick and dead birds. but we haven't had really targeted messages making them aware that, hey, this is going on right now, and these birds that you're hunting right now are likely could be carrying the virus.
Yeah. You know, that's I'm glad you brought that up. That's sort of what I was thinking about, you know, looking at innovative approaches, even if they're not perfect, for kind of doing this. And maybe something as simple as an after season survey of hunters. Did you encounter sick and dead geese? I mean, something that simple. They actually maybe gauge it a little bit, and that you could use annually to you know, kind of say, okay, this was a bad year, this wasn't a bad year, et cetera, et cetera. And this is for you all to think about, but you don't need to get caught in we tend to get into the weeds when we do this and want to be real precise and everything else, but we're not there yet. And I think anything you can do would be great.
John, go ahead.
Hey, Barb, I kind of started down that road. I tried, you know, everything communications wise is a little bit of a challenge. So I asked for communication to go out to our hunters, and it kind of got co-opted into a very high tech vet speak letter that will not do anything really for hunters. So I did get a poster made for the WMAs where people hunt that has just kind of a, here's the things you need to do. But I tried to get something targeted at hunters, and it just, you know, I'm second in line when it comes to disease stuff. So it became probably too technical for our hunters to really benefit from.
I had this discussion with our director just today about how the health people and the waterfowl people aren't the same people. And we're going to try to send out something to the wildlife health component of your agencies to kind of give those some guidance on this also. And I hear you on that. And I understand that, but we'll try to do something to connect the dots a little better, maybe.
Yeah, the health stuff takes the more important thing over the hunters, and it almost feels like they're two separate letter. You know, they combined it by having the last two sentences where hunters need to be careful, but after 3 paragraphs of kind of technical stuff, you lost most of my hunters, I think. So it feels like there's one that's a specific human health type concern that needs to go out, and then there's a separate one, hey hunters, this is for you. But so far I haven't other than getting a poster to hang at our WMAs, I haven't gotten that extra information.
Yeah, see, that's interesting, John, because ours isn't targeted specifically to the hunters. It was just a general press release, but the general press release was targeted towards hunters. I mean, we led off with, hey, hunters, guess what? There's, up and down the Mississippi Flyway, where a lot of states are seeing dead snow geese. They're most likely high path AI. You guys need to take precautions, and here's what we suggest. So even though it wasn't delivered specifically to the hunters, the press release was targeted to hunters.
Yeah, here in Arkansas, we're pretty much the same thing like what Tennessee did. But one other thing that we did do in our guidebook this year, we ended up just having like a short segment, and that way we could let hunters know like what precautions they could take if they start seeing sick or dead birds.
Okay. Any other discussion or questions? All right. Well, this was very helpful, Dave. Thank you very much for joining us on such short notice and providing that information.
No problem. And you know where we live, and if we can help you at all, just give us a holler. All right.
Great. Thank you.
All right. I'm going to sign off now. Thank you all.
Yeah. Thanks, Dave.
All right.
All right. And next up, let's move to Dave Scott for the Fish and Wildlife Service.
Thanks, Oren. I know we have later on the agenda Harvest Management Working Group meeting with JB and Adam wrap up, so I won't get into that. I also saw that Frank is not going to be able to join us today because we have a meeting right now that's going on between the Canadian Wildlife Service and Fish and Wildlife Service talking about some of the survey efficiencies and planning. So that's an important thing that Ken and others are involved with. Over the last couple of weeks, council has worked on getting a NACA rep. And as of this morning, Kelly Straka was approved in her nomination. That's gone on to Migrant headquarters into AFWA. We also have Pete Hildreth. I assume, Warren, that you know Pete. I have never met him, but he is the Conservation and Recreation Administrator for the Iowa DNR, the director level representative to the AHM task force that was approved. And I passed that information on to Boomer and to Pat Devers so we can communicate to all those folks as we plan for the first meeting. That's one of the items we talked about last week at Harvest Management Working Group, and we debriefed Ken on that meeting earlier today. So still anticipating the first meeting of that group to come up sometime late January, early February. Nothing has really been detailed. We've been trying to have conversations with Jerome and others about the importance that we see the value of that being a first meeting in person. So hopefully that'll come together. This morning, earlier, I saw a note on the National Wildlife Refuge System Biological Integrity, Diversity, and Environmental Health rule that the Flyway provided comments on about 6 months ago or so. And that it's going to be out tomorrow, but in the reading room, it says they're withdrawing that. So you guys got the link for that. And if you want to see the actual language, you go back tomorrow and pull it up. But apparently there were lots of comments. My schedule, just so you're aware, I'm going to be off the next 2 weeks, burning leave, but I'm not really going anywhere. So if you really need to get a hold of me, call my cell, shoot me a text, send an email. I'll get to it before too long and get back to you. And I would just give you the quick summary that Harvest Management Working Group meeting was a success, and we'll be talking about that later in the agenda. And the Fish and Wildlife Service and the rest of the federal government definitely getting into full swing of the transition to a new administration. So we have a lot of budget uncertainty. This is the week that the continuing resolution goes through Friday, and we'll see what happens. But that's my update.
Okay. Thank you, Dave. Questions for Dave?
I'll also note that, Pam's here, but Joe Marty has joined us as well.
Welcome, Joe. All right, well, hearing no questions, maybe we can also circle back at the end during the Harvest Management Working Group.
Okay.
Moving right on here. Next item on our agenda is a proposal from Mitch Weedman regarding winter banding. Mitch, are you on?
Hey, Aaron, I'm here.
Okay. Well, we're ready, so I'd say take it away.
Okay, great. Hang on a second here. I'll just share my screen. Can you see that okay?
Yep, looks good on my end.
Perfect. Okay, so hi, everyone. In case we haven't met, my name is Mitch Wigman. I'm a prof in the Department of Biology at the University of Saskatchewan. And several of us have been working together to produce a proposal on a winter banding program for the Mississippi Flyway. And so I prepared just a few slides to augment the proposal that John had sent around. Or actually, I think John had disseminated that a few days ago. And that was based on some conversations we had with folks in Tennessee and Arkansas and Kentucky and Louisiana a couple weeks ago. And this is actually linking to previous flyway meetings also. So a little background, this is in the proposal I sent, but these are the highlights anyway. The pre-hunting season duck banding data that we all know quite well across the Canadian and US prairies, they're pretty important for estimating demography and population size. And we anticipate that there are going to be some reductions in federal funding for pre-season banding. It's raised some concerns about the ability to estimate survival and harvest rates, among other demographic rates for priority duck species in the future. And so we're realizing at the same time that, or considering at the same time, that this is going to be something that winter banding may help improve. And so post-hunting season, duck banding at wintering sites is less demanding, and potentially it's cost effective as a complement here. We know some southern states are already winter banding, so it's spurring interest in creating a winter banding program. So we have several objectives for you here, and I say we, I mean, it's this group of folks I was referencing earlier, John and Jamie and Brett and Paul Link, but also this is with a postdoctoral fellow in my group, Antti Pirinen, who will lead analyses, and I'll talk more about Antti in a few minutes. So collectively, we've put these objectives together: evaluate the utility of winter banding and compensating for reductions in summer banding effort by estimating age and sex-specific annual survival and harvest rates for mallard, pintail, blue-winged teal, and green-winged teal in the Mississippi Flyway. We had some conversations about which species, and these were some of the priorities that folks mentioned. Then we're hoping to develop a reasonable set of winter banding strategies, including banding targets, timing, and locations for the Mississippi Flyway under multiple scenarios of reduced summer banding. So again, considering the idea that some funding is going reductions in funding are leading to lower sample sizes in summer banding, preseason banding in the future. And then lastly, we're hoping to assess the utility of winter banding for estimating movement between regions and region-specific annual survival in the Mississippi Flyway. When we were meeting with several states over the last couple of weeks, we developed a bit of a laundry list of things that we could do with winter banding data that might be trickier to do with summer banding data. And this is one of those that Paul mentioned. So we thought, well, this is quite straightforward to showcase. And so it's a core objective of the work. And I think ecologically, it's quite interesting. So now I have a few slides showing you our approach, or reviewing our approach anyway. We're going to take the average number of mallards, pintails, blue-winged teal, green-winged teal banded in the Canadian and US prairies during the last 10 years, at least during the pre-COVID period, to establish a baseline for sample sizes. And then we can reduce the number of banded birds 25%, 50%, 75%, and run dead recovery or parameterized dead recovery survival models. Then we'll collate winter banding data from the Mississippi Flyway and simulate data, that is, simulate banding and recovery data using summer and winter banding data with varying sample sizes. Here's just a brief table showing what the preliminary sample sizes might be. This is based again on those conversations with states currently winter banding. So sort of a low, a medium, and a high there in columns 2, 3, and 4 on what practitioners thought might be reasonable. And this is something I'd like your feedback on as well during the conversation part of the meeting today. So these bandings so far are based on Kentucky, Tennessee, Arkansas, and Louisiana. We're going to then use summer banded and winter banded birds in a single dead recovery model with low, medium, and high sample sizes to compare the means and the 95% credible intervals, or a Bayesian confidence interval, CRI, for survival. And this will be really the comparative metric to determine the losses in precision associated with, say, reductions in summer banding, or the gains in precision associated with winter banding. Then we can estimate harvests for summer-only banded birds under a status quo and reduce summer banding and compare those means and 95% credible intervals to those from winter banding data. And results from Objective 1, the previous several bullets will really guide the accomplishment of Objective 2, which is to design this reasonable winter banding program. Then we will simulate varying recapture rates on wintering areas to evaluate the potential to estimate movement among wintering regions, this additional piece I was referencing. So that is really, we're going to showcase the required banding and recapture effort, comparing estimates to known values. Okay, several anticipated outputs here. The first is that we're going to substantially improve our understanding about the utility of winter banding towards survival and harvest estimation of ducks, and clarify the statistical challenges associated with using winter banding data, as well as the impact of winter banding sample size on demographic estimates. Folks have been debating for, I gather, some years about the utility of winter banding data for typical demographic rate estimation, like survival, like harvest, using indirect recoveries. And I'm pretty certain that it's possible. Statistically, it's for sure possible. So this is where we'd like to overcome some of the existing hurdles in thinking and show the anticipated improvements depending on sample sizes. And we think the results will help practitioners design a winter banding program that's cost effective in the Mississippi Flyway. A number of flyways are considering these exact same implications, similar concerns in reduced funding, similar ideas on how do we leverage a pre-hunting season and a post-hunting season banding scheme. So we think there's some nice applicability to those issues or concerns in the other flyways as well. So a bit of a demonstration is always good. And I think this is going to be a pretty darn enticing manuscript for an international ecological peer-reviewed journal. I think this is going to take about 6 months. I mentioned Antti Piirainen, a postdoc in a postdoctoral fellow in my research group right now. Antti is leading development of an integrated population model for Western Arctic and Wrangel Island snow geese right now. So the Pacific Flyway is considering very similar changes to summer data sets, summer collected data sets. And so Antti, in step 1, formed this integrated model. In step 2, for Western Arctic and Wrangel Island snow geese, we've been having these exact conversations about which data sets, how much data to collect, and what are the implications on the precision of these demographic rates. So he's particularly well suited to lead these analyses. This is a 6-month package. In January and February coming, we could begin to collate the summer banding records for the 10 years I mentioned pre-COVID. In February, parameterize the dead recovery models using summer data. In March, simulate winter banding data and form dead recovery models using summer and winter banding data. In April, conduct scenario playing with varying sample size of winter bands. In May, Objective 3, build the capture, recapture, recovery models to estimate movement among wintering regions. And in June, complete the manuscript, and we could present results to an upcoming Mississippi Flyway meeting. I suppose the winter meeting might be best suited in about a year's time. Here's the budget in the proposal. So this is 6 months of postdoc salary and benefits, plus a bit of money to attend a Flyway Council meeting and present the results. The Mississippi Flyway has a 10% overhead or indirect policy. So all that together is about $35,000 US. Okay, that's the summary. I wanted to leave some time for a conversation and thoughts among the states. So please, if you have questions, let's do it.
Okay. Well, thanks, Mitch. I appreciate the proposal. Open up for questions and discussion.
Yeah, hey guys, it's Jamie. Mitch, really appreciate you guys putting together proposals so quick. I think one thing that I had expressed a concern about back in August when we had talked about this was whether or not anybody was going to get in touch with those professors that are putting out a bunch of bands. Like we know Doug Osborne's been putting out a bunch of bands in Arkansas for a while. Cohen's been putting out a bunch of bands, albeit on my permit, but he's been putting out a bunch of bands. And whether or not we were gonna make sure that we weren't stepping on anybody's toes. And like I just think about Paul has been saying for years, we got to protect the data, we got to protect the banding data. So yeah, I mean, did we do that? Because I just want to make sure that we're not going to screw anybody over. I think we're okay from Brad Cohen's standpoint. I don't think he had any plans on doing any of that kind of analysis. But had anybody talked to Doug Osborne about this yet? Because I'm just not sure where he was at with all this. I just, we all want this work to get done somewhere, but I just want to make sure that we're not screwing anybody who might already be working on it. So yeah. I just want to throw that out there before we get into too much discussion.
Yeah, Jamie, this is Paul here. I'll
Go
jump
ahead,
in
Paul.
real quick. I remember our last call, our plan was to first find out if there was interest among the states, to jump into this exercise. And then if there was, then we were going to open this up to a broader group of people and find out what data people might have available for those simulations. So no, I personally haven't reached out to anybody yet, but the core group of people that were on that initial call to help put this proposal together, that's by no means complete. And once this thing got legs under it and we saw that there was a potential chance, then we were going to reach out up to and including, actually looking what data is available, find out who the owners of it are, and then invite them to participate and engage with them.
Okay,
Hey,
thanks, Paul. I didn't quite remember it that way.
This is John. Also, I wanted to jump in also too, kind of Jamie. The original proposal from Mitch that we kind of reviewed a few days before everybody else saw it, I think Mitch, y'all had actually planned on doing it without using any of the winter banding data, just as simulation, and you kind of at my request threw it in to put the data. So it's possible to work, however, with or we could still potentially do this without if somebody's offended. I mean, there's sources of data that we don't have to use all of it out there if somebody doesn't want it used.
Yeah, for sure. Totally want to be inclusive with this. Not meant to be excluding or stepping on toes, as you phrased it, Jamie. I mean, Doug, you're on here. Please provide some perspective. I mean, this is meant to be an among state flyaway wide effort. That's the goal.
Yeah, appreciate it. First thing, if I would ask the flyaway, for some reason I've been taken off of the email chain, and I didn't even know any of this was going down until some friends in the flyaway forwarded it to me. But there's a lot of researchers on this, and I'm on some subcommittees, but for whatever reason I haven't been getting these meeting notifications. So is that? I mean, what is there a particular request I need to send in to be a part of this? Or
that's my fault in doing this. Keeping these email lists are a challenge, and
yes,
I've when people have said, "Hey, you left me out," I've added them back in, but it's kind of a nightmare, and it was no intent. It's just on me that somehow when I made the list, I left you out. So I'm sorry as far as the meeting announcements.
Yeah, so we deal with the same.
I'll put you on, and as soon as this meeting is done.
Thank you very much. I mean, I think this is essential. I think this is going to help, help me to make sure we're focused on getting the bands in the right, distributed in the right counties, but, I've gotten a lot of pushback for 12 years from this exact group. And, and there has been a lot of talk about, making sure to talk with the researchers. But the concern that I have here is that the research objectives are overlapping with my master's student that's sitting upstairs right now. I mean, I needed 10 or 12 years worth of data to have a relatively decent analysis. We know that band data needs to have kind of a, it's not, you can't do a 2-year study on 2-3 years of band data. So that's where we're at. Is I'm 10, 12 years into, this program, and I have a master's student sitting upstairs looking at survival analysis. I'm teaching her through our mark how to estimate these, thinking about the biases. She's a young student. She's got some learning to do. She's been on calls or emails, at least with Todd Arnold, and now, some other folks have that I'm trying to get her engaged with. And I'm worried about, just the overlap in the objectives, I guess. I mean, I know your postdoc can knock this out, the survival and harvest stuff out and, overnight. But my student's sort of working on this, so I'm not sure where we stand on that. And how, but I think in terms of understanding the distribution of where these bands need to go and all that, I think there's some important stuff here. I'm willing to work with people, but a little bit kind of taken back by, not being contacted. So this don't need to be the Doug Osborne show, but that's my thoughts for now.
Yeah, that's good, Doug. I think, a couple of thoughts there. One is, in terms of the actual ecology of estimating survival of these birds, that's not so important here. I mean, the ability to use your particular data, and I assume for Arkansas specific bandings, estimate survival, that's great, and shouldn't be viewed as a major research outcome here. More, this is leveraging, well, in my mind anyway, and please, anybody correct me if I'm wrong here, but as I understand it, this is leveraging what we know about survival from summer mostly, and a little bit winter if you wish for it, because there is a bit of winter banding data outside of Arkansas also, to understand what a winter banding program will look like among all states who want to band in winter in the future. So really, it's just meant to establish some sideboards, some parameters on what is possible even among all winter states, and then what sort of precision might you anticipate in survival and harvest given what folks believe is possible. So it's more of a forecast than a previous assessment of the ecology of demography.
Gotcha. The difference in our annual survival from winter banded birds and the known harvest mortality is going to give us a little bit of insight on natural mortality rates during the non-breeding season. That's my direction here. And so thinking about getting this kid from zero through just a basic survival analysis, understand what that annual survival rate looks like, minus, and then hopefully pushing her into these 2-season survival analysis. That's kind of where I'm going. So I think if we can avoid some of that stuff, I think we're on to something, because we definitely do. Maybe I'm clustering maybe I'm using too much resources and clustering band sites that don't necessarily need to be. Because if you look at the distribution of the harvest of our bands from the last 14 years, the 40,000 bands that we put out, I can promise you that they are very representative of the entire population. So I think that's the beauty of moving forward with your project. But I just ask that we make sure that we know sort of what your specific outcomes are, because your first objective was there's a good bit of overlap there. So, but and I thank those on this call that that bumped me and forwarded me the information on this agenda. I appreciate being here. Thank you.
Paul or Jamie or John or Brett, I mean, you guys have been a part of these conversations longer than me. Do you want to provide additional perspective there?
Yeah, Mitch, this is Paul again. I think you pretty well covered it. I mean, most of the folks that have been around the flyway for a while know that, for at least the last 15 or so years that I've been with the banding committee, a concern of mine has been the increasing reliance on banding data and the declining quantity and quality of the banding data. That's been something that I've been trying to champion all along. And I mean, I've always supported banding whenever and wherever it can happen, because I've seen how these analyses have improved, and some of the brilliant people that are working with the data, that whenever we can get bands out on the landscape, there's always going to be uses for it. that's going to improve our estimates, our vital rate estimates. And so those that saw, the proportion of, just my preseason banding crews that you guys help staff, in the 3 stations in Eastern Dakotas, we're banding, 80 to 96% of the pintails and mallards during the preseason time period. And so that's been a big concern of mine, is what happens if our effort falls apart, goes away, or the Eastern Dakotas have an epic 10-year drought and those 3 refuges don't have the water and the birds, and we don't fuel that level of banding any longer. So that's ultimately where this is coming from. Is I think we need to start exploring alternatives, as preseason banding, for whatever reason, it's declined significantly over the last couple decades. So certainly there's no intention on a manuscript, or a research question was the farthest thing from my concern when we started these discussions 15 years ago. It was just to try to keep the fuel flowing into this machine and keep us informed about changes in vital rates as habitat conditions change and hunter effort changes and dwindles. So I certainly don't mean to try to step on any toes. And again, a manuscript was the last thing I was worried about getting into this. I was more or less looking, how do we keep banding data, objective and in quantity and quality that keeps us moving forward.
Yeah, and for me, Paul convinced me early on in my time in the flyway that banding was important, whether it's summer or like he said, anytime you put a band on a bird, there's some information there that has to be useful in some form or fashion. We just got to figure out a way to use it. And so, Paul sold me on that really early on, and that's why I'm supportive of this. I think this is important work that some states in the South, we can pull this off. We can sling some bands in the wintertime. We just need to know how many, where, and somebody else with a big brain can figure out what we can use it for and how to supplement potential future losses of summer banding. So.
Yeah, I would just add that we've had this discussion in my 20 years in the flyway multiple times, over and over and over. And again, the answer was kind of always, it's just too complicated to use winter banding data. And I want to say it was even maybe Brian Davis or something just 3 or 4 years ago told us it was too complicated. And then sometime in the last year or so, Todd Arnold's like, nope, you can do this. And so that's where we all kind of got interested, is what can we do here? And that's where we talked to Mitch and Todd a couple of months ago, and Todd kind of backed out, but let Mitch's crew go forward. And I think that they've done a really nice job of kind of putting together something that we can potentially learn a lot for not a lot of money.
Yeah, I'd really like to appreciate everybody's patience. I kind of felt like a dumbass for a long time, kept putting winter banding on the agenda for the banding committee, and I'm pretty excited about where we are right now, thanks to Mitch and his good group of students in his lab. So appreciate all your effort, Mitch.
Yeah, happy to do it. I mean, it sounds to me like we should have some more conversation, Doug, given some interest in the flyway in ensuring that there's not sufficient overlap. First in objective sharing, and then also in thinking about any tweaks to this effort, given your students on the go.
Appreciate that, Mitch. Thank you. Thanks for Paul. That was eloquently said. Your history behind all that, and it was good to hear that. So, thank you.
Rod, you've had your hand up for a while, so apologies for the wait. Go ahead.
No worries. Thanks for that presentation, Mitch. Just curious if you considered black ducks, because black duck 2-season banding's been operational for quite a while now, and they've got some experience using those data for the harvest management model. So just curious if that wouldn't be a benefit, because you've already got the data and folks are using it, and you could compare the simulations to the empirical stuff and see how things jive and how they might work together. And I'm surprised Dave didn't bring that up, being on the Black Duck joint venture.
Yeah, I mean, certainly Pat led on that effort to publish the 2-season paper in ecological applications a couple of years ago now on on the utility of winter banding data. So we know this is possible. Like for sure, I mean, it's a really nice demonstration of how winter banding data can augment summer support. Not in this exact way, like not with intentions to reduce necessarily the summer banding or early fall banding of black ducks, but I mean, to the extent that people thought that we could band reliably black ducks in the Mississippi Flyway, I wasn't hearing a whole lot there, Rod. And so just from a simulation, does it work perspective? Yes, that's totally doable and logical. But I think we can actually move beyond that because we already know it's possible. I'm like we're doing this for a number of species right now. So more it's a matter of what about these species and what about the species the Mississippi Flyway, the southern states think they can reasonably catch annually for 10 years or more. And so that's what really guided conversation when we met a couple weeks ago to nail the mallard, pintail, blue-winged teal, and green-winged teal, and not others. But this is part of the presentation today, and this conversation is what do people think they can catch? And if there are species missing here that were not included that we can catch thousands of annually, predictably and ideally among states, then let's do it. Or let's at least explore that species or those species in addition.
Right.
You had green-winged teal on there, right, Mitch?
Blue-wing and green-wing, yeah. And I think that was mostly Paul was thinking high potential for large numbers of green wings annually in Louisiana if we wished for it.
Yeah. And yeah.
But more states are better for any of these. You know, it's not so comfortable to have one state catching the majority of the 5,000 bands on green-winged teal, for example. So if we could imagine among state effort, that would be great.
To use these analysis to inform field methods. Sometimes it's we can catch green-winged teal the same way we can catch mallards, but probably it may be more efficient catching them in a different way. So I guess where I'm going with that is thinking about, efficiency on your end. Do you need to focus on particular species that may drive the harvest information? Is it something that we work on one species at first and then see how it comes out of it before we add all these other species in, because they are different, capture methods and, sometimes I guess we catch a lot of teal in our traps as well. I'm just thinking about, your 6-month time frame is kind of relatively short turnaround and just not stretching, extending yourself too far, I guess, in terms of multiple species in a case like this.
Well, it's no slower to include these other species, Doug. Like it's almost the exact same amount of time to do this for mallards versus to do it for the 4 species or more. We considered gadwall, others, but there was just some uncertainty about how much people could catch of those other species. But yeah, if people wanted more, like the whole dabbler guild, that would hardly take any additional coding, runtime, any of it,
right. Gotcha.
Because they'll all be indexed accordingly.
Yeah. So the comment earlier was that you're using mostly simulation data. Is that like you got to feed the model with some sort of real data on survival, right? And so what does that look like?
So good question. So in the review, those couple slides where I had the review of the approaches, I can imagine this happening multiple ways depending on what people are comfortable with. The strongest data by far are the pre-hunting season banding data. So basically what we would like is sideboards on the life history of the bird for 1, and for 2, like for survival, but also harvest rate. But for 2, the exact precision, the mean in precision at normal banding efforts in the pre-hunting season over the last 10 years. So basically a data pull, which we already have all this information, but a data pull from the BBL to gain the banding records for the Canadian US prairies in the period 2012 to 2022, and a Brownie dead recovery model will yield the survival and the precision that we all already know quite well. So that would be the beginnings. And that's how I originally wrote the proposal, because I wasn't sure about the quality of the winter banding information toward improvement in something that's already excellent, the summer-based information. And and yet winter is what we're talking about implementing here. So what I pitched is, in a revision, good suggestion from John, pull some of the winter banding information we have among the southern states that have been doing it and see if we can augment winter into summer banding to gain perspective about what survival is, the precision, mean, and credible interval width of survival and harvest rate right now. And that provides the baseline then to develop these simulations under status quo sample sizes, and then under reduced sample sizes in summer and increased sample sizes in winter in the coming years.
I follow you. Sorry I made you repeat that to all these people, because they probably got it the first time. But in terms of understanding demographics and population numbers and all that, like, isn't the natural mortality during the off season what we're missing to make more efficient management decisions on, like, because maybe just as numbers of wetlands go down and the populations are declining, there's probably a higher level of natural mortality right now because we're pushing birds into smaller areas, predators, all that. And so I think, there's probably there's probably an exponential growth in natural mortality when populations are down, whereas when they're big and there's birds everywhere, they can scatter it out. So I think there's a mechanism that we're missing in our ability to make effective decisions in terms of populations. And that's that level of mortality during the breeding season. And so I think that's the utility. I think that, the 2-season banding paper by Boomer and them, like, I think that broke this all open. That's in terms of us better understanding the mechanism that's driving these populations to where we can actually use some sort of modified adaptive harvest to monitor these populations on a more regular basis and make decisions. I mean, numbers are down a lot now, so we got to figure out what's going on, and I know the condition of the prairies are bad, but and they will rebound when the rain comes, I think. To what level, I don't know, right? Because we've lost a lot of wetlands. So I think there's a mechanism of the demographics, I guess, with my rambling, that we don't understand, and I think that's natural mortality.
Yeah, I mean, we should be able to get at this decoupling of harvest mortality and natural mortality via this 2-season arrangement. We've done this, we've been doing this for pintails for a number of years now, 6-7 years. And the winter banding data for pintails are not strong enough to reasonably allow 2-season banding at the moment with the current sample sizes. So this is why I think, just in a little anecdotal way, development of a strategy, a winter banding program among states to gain the greatest sample sizes possible so as to allow this natural versus harvest mortality estimation to be fully realized. So we don't have enough empirical support for that now. The proposal hopefully will allow some better understanding of sample sizes that would support that splitting of the estimation, which I agree is pretty darn important.
Good stuff. Let's just keep an open line of communication, if you would. Thank you.
Yeah, sounds great. Let's catch up in the new year, Doug, on this, and with anybody else who would like to.
Thanks, Mitch.
Okay. Any further questions for Mitch? Discussion on the proposal. Mitch, I think how we're going to handle the proposal is we'll have it routed through both our research committee for review and our banding committee. And we'll ask those committees to come forth with a recommendation to be acted on at our February meeting. Does that timeline work for you?
Well, I'd like to begin as soon as possible. So I mean, we can talk about these details perhaps more later, but basically if we can gain perspective in the next 3 or 4 weeks about whether this is going to be a runner, then I'd like to begin on it, because we don't know how long Antti is going to be a postdoc in the lab, and we have his expertise right now. And Paul mentioned that folks have been hoping for this for some years. So basically, this is not one of those projects where we can punt a couple months and still imagine the same level of quality result. So if we want to do this, we need to ascribe it into Antti's workflow from January so that he can complete it by June. And after that, I'm not sure he's going to be with the group a whole lot longer than that. So if you wish for a February decision, then it would be nice to have a few weeks from now a bit more of a yes, no, or sooner. And then also a flexible grant that would allow for some expenses in January to be attributed. If we can do those things, we're in.
Okay, we're going to have some internal discussion because that is outside of our normal processes. I'll talk with our folks and we will get back to you as soon as we have clear answers.
Yeah, that's perfect. I know the holidays are coming. Folks hopefully will unplug for a couple weeks, so there's not that level of urgency, but first couple of weeks of January would be great to learn a little more.
Okay, I will do my best to get some semblance of certainty, but it's outside of our normal procedure, so I can't go any farther than to say that we can discuss it and try to provide you with some measure of certainty as best we can.
Yeah, perfect. That sounds great, Oren.
Great. Thanks, Mitch.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Mitch.
Yeah, thanks, Mitch.
All right, next on the agenda is Taylor Ballard. Taylor is out of our shop here, the Iowa DNR. And this agenda item I suggested a couple months ago as more of a methodology, not so much trying to share with you all the exact details of how we're setting our duck seasons here in Iowa, but I've been really pleased with the methodology that we've been able to use, and I just wanted to share that with you all in case it would have relevance to your state agency. So Taylor and I are going to co-present here. I'll talk about the context, and then I'll turn it over to Taylor to talk about the analyses. So go ahead and advance the slide there, Taylor.
Okay, so you can see the right screen. Okay.
Yep, we're good. Okay, so here in Iowa, we historically set our hunting seasons annually, and then of course set our waterfowl hunting zones once every 5 years. And it was a major headache. We got into a lot of annual battles, particularly about the timing of the duck season. Should we have more days in October versus days in December is the central issue. And then every time that the zone season was open, every time we had an opportunity to make changes for zones, we did make changes. This is where we currently are, is we have 3 staggered zones to set our hunting season, our duck hunting season dates, and zone hunting seasons are earliest in the north zone and latest in the south zone. But recently we've been reevaluating this for the 26 through 2030 period, and that's the data that we want to share with you and share that approach because it has been very valuable for us and for our administration in our messaging with both our staff and with hunters. So now I'll just turn it over to Taylor for Taylor to talk to you about this project and how she approached it. Go ahead, Taylor.
Yeah, thanks for having me on today. I'm excited to talk about this. So we spent the spring and summer analyzing 3 main sources of data. So the first would have been the HIP Hunter Diary Survey, the second being our fall migration survey that we conduct here each year, And the third was a hunter survey that we sent out to waterfowl hunters in about January of this year. So first, we wanted to look at the Harvest Information Program data. So we used the 2021 and 2022 Hunter Diary surveys for Iowa. We wanted to look at these to get a better sense of when are hunters out there hunting. And so we chose to use these 2 years of data since at the time they're the only 2 years of data we had under our current season structure. And we wanted to be able to look at things at the zone level. So what you can see on these first graphs is a breakdown in each zone of just the percent of regular season hunts. So this is just what percentage of hunts were reported during each month in each zone. And it's, you can see in the North Zone that October had the highest percent, and then in the Central and South Zone, November had the highest percentages, with all 3 zones having the lowest participation in December. But even further, we really wanted to look at the usage of available hunting days in each zone to kind of tell us where we get the most value when allocating days for our duck season. So on this graph, you can see on the x-axis, we have the hunting zone. The y-axis was the percentage of days used. And then within those, each month is color-coded. And so we calculated these percentages as the number of days that at least one hunt was reported divided by the number of days available to hunt. And we reported the results as averages between the 21 and 22 hunting seasons. So just for example, in 2022 in the North Zone, there were 24 days available to hunt in October, and at least one hunt was reported on 19 of those days. So about 80% of those days would have been considered used. And as Oren mentioned, we do have 3 zones and they are staggered dates. So the number of days available to hunt during each month does differ by zone because of those start dates staggering. So our second data source, we used our fall migration survey data. So each year in Iowa, we conduct a fall migration survey that begins about September 1st through December 31st. And sites are counted by staff all around the state. They're visited 1 time a week throughout that duration of the survey period. So for this particular analysis, we use data from the most recent 10 years, so 2014 through 2023, for 55 sites, and those are shown here on the map in orange. And it broke down to about 25 sites in the North Zone, 10 sites in the Central Zone, and 20 in the South Zone. So this plot, just a quick plot to show our statewide duck migration. So you can see we have date on the x-axis, the ducks counted on the y-axis, and then this black line is the 10-year average, surrounded by the 95% confidence interval in that kind of light blue color. But beyond the statewide level, we really wanted to look at the data more in depth by each zone. So for this presentation, we're just going to use the Central Zone as an example. So as I mentioned, we're using a data set from 10 years, and that the survey period runs from September 1st through December 31st, with sites being counted 1 time a week. So with sites being counted once a week, the shifting in calendar dates across years can make it a little bit hard to correctly bin a date into a week if you want to do comparisons like averages or when the peaks are occurring, kind of things like that. So with our approach this year for evaluating seasons, we wanted to be able to more directly compare dates to allow us to quantify the percent of migration that our current seasons were capturing. So ideally, we needed to have a count for each day instead of just having that once a week count. So we used a function in program R that linearly interpolated counts for each species at each site in each year. And that got us to this level of having the daily values. And so On this plot here, you can see the blue line, which is the 10-year average, surrounded by the 95% confidence interval, kind of in that light blue green color. And then you can see the hunting seasons are laid out in the background. So the special September teal season is shown in gray, and then the first and second segments of our regular duck season are shown here by the black squares. And as I mentioned, with the daily values, our goal was to quantify the migration. So if you can see there at the bottom, we have a note that says the 2023 season dates would have captured almost 73% of the 10-year average of that duck migration. But beyond that, we wanted to also identify what are the top 60 days of the duck migration. And so you can see that here in kind of the orange shaded area is the top 60 overall duck migration. And so by displaying it visually like this, we can see how our seasons intersect with migration, and then also see those top 60 days. So you can see here there's the gap where our split is, we're actually missing some of the top 60 days, but in the central zone, it ends right about, our season ends right about when the top 60 days do end. So beyond visually, again, we can quantify that and see that the 2023 season dates had about 73%, and then the top 60 days had about 75%. So you can see, we're really only off about 2% there by having the split where we do. And then this plot here shows the mallard top 60 days in green. So here we're able to look at the top 60 days of the mallard migration, our top 60 days overall of the migration, and then again with our hunting seasons. And so this kind of gives us a way to compare all three against each other and look at the trade-offs maybe for, say, if we set our seasons based on the top 60 days of the mallard migration, you can see that we would have to shift our dates probably 7 to 10 days later than they are, which would ultimately mean that we would miss several days of the overall peak abundance that are there. So while we can see it visually, again, we can quantify that as well. So these numbers on the bottom here show that the 2023 season dates captured about 79% of the mallard migration, and then the top 60 days capture about 85%. I guess, and to add, so with that, not only can we look at our current season dates and how they match up with the migration and various species, we can also look at what we might expect to capture during future hunting seasons with the way calendar dates will slightly shift our season. And then we could also just look at our seasons overall under a totally different structure and see, where we would capture migration, how that would change the amount that we're capturing. And then our last source was our hunter survey. So we mailed out a survey in, I believe it was in January 2024 to almost 10,000 waterfowl hunters. So we pulled a sample from a pool based on a purchase of a migratory bird fee, and then also a HIP registration in 2022 and 2023. So we did an initial mailing to hunters with a QR code and an online link to ask them to complete the survey online. And then we followed up with additional mailings as needed to hunters. And so ultimately we wound up with almost 3,700 usable responses. So we resulted in a response rate of like 37.4%, which we were pretty happy with. And so for this, I'll just kind of hit on a couple of the key questions. So first, we asked hunters an open-ended question about how they would like the season dates in the zone they hunt more often. And as you can see on the plot here, when asked that question, 43.6% of hunters still wanted to have later season dates. But then beyond that, we move forward to ask them to prioritize their importance. So we asked them to select the 4 weeks that were most important to them for duck hunting in Iowa. And that's what this histogram shows here, just the frequency of response or selection of the different weeks. And so although a lot of hunters said they wanted later dates, the 4 weeks of November had the highest selection when asked, which were most important to them. And then again, we were able to break this down at a zone level as well. So this is for the central zone. So the same zone we were looking at migration data for. And again, the 4 weeks in November are the peak here. And then you can kind of see on each side of that, it's pretty evenly distributed. But what we really wanted to do was to be able to, again, match this up with our current hunting seasons as well as the other data we looked at. So what you can see on this plot is similar to the migration plot that I showed earlier that has our hunting seasons on it. And then we took the percentage of hunters that selected each week and plotted that over it. So that's what's shown by the red line here. And then the red shaded area shows what the 8 weeks with the highest selection would have been, or about 60 days for the length of the season. And you can see they match up pretty well with where our current seasons are. But again, not only visually, we were able to look at it and say, well, our current seasons are capturing about 88% of those days that hunters selected as their most important for duck hunting. And we can put the migration back over it to kind of tie it all together and see that ultimately our current season structure, the migration timing, and the hunter preference actually all line up pretty well. There might be some slight differences there in where the migration peak occurs and where the hunters view it. But ultimately our seasons do capture all of that. And so with that, I'll turn it back to Oren.
So it was extremely helpful to have that data both visually and quantitatively. And so that's what I really wanted to share with you all, that in case it would have relevance for your states, we'd be happy to provide the code or to talk with you about the methodology to see if it could help you out. So that's all we have. Adam, did you have a question?
Not a question, but just a comment, I guess, because I do essentially really close to the exact same thing in Indiana. And one thing that I did this year, actually last year on the last survey that we sent out in 2023, well, yeah, it was after the 22-23 season, was instead of asking hunters for their top 4 favorite weeks, I asked them to rank their top 4 favorite weeks. And that allowed me to weight weeks by not only by which ones were selected, but by actual preference level. And that actually changed the outcome a little bit for 2 of my 3 zones in terms of when hunters wanted to hunt. It shifted things a little bit later, which, I mean, it is what it is. It's a little bit unfortunate from my perspective because there's quite a strong disconnect between our migration data and when hunters want to hunt. They want to hunt after our ducks are largely on their way out. But anyway, so that weighting thing really kind of elucidated some more that the gross just give me 4 weeks didn't get at.
Will you go with the weighting in the future, Adam, or are you going to go back to just the pick 4 weeks?
Oh, I'll keep the weighting. It doesn't really add any difficulty to the analysis. It's one little minor step. And it's a little bit more, I think it's a little bit more precise. It lets people have a little bit more say in terms of when they want to hunt instead of just picking 4 weeks and maybe one of them is really important to them.
Thanks, Adam. Jamie, did you have a question?
Yeah, not so much a question. It was more, I just wanted to thank Taylor. We tried getting Taylor to come to the summer meeting to present this. Things just didn't work out. And I know we've tried a couple of times to get her on this call, and just really thankful that you were finally able to make it. This is really great stuff, and appreciate you sharing it with us. And Oren, thanks for bringing it to my attention and wanting to share it with everybody. So thanks a lot, both of you.
You're welcome. Okay, Taylor, would you stop sharing, please?
Yep.
Any further questions or discussion? Okay. Well, thank you, Taylor. We're going to keep pushing along here. Adam and John, do you want to talk about the Harvest Management Working Group, please?
I can, but just in the interest of time, I don't know. I wrote up about 1.5 pages of a summary that I can send out to the group and then maybe answer questions on our next call if you want to get to the agenda stuff for winter.
The winter stuff is.
Okay. All right. Well, then I'll try to blaze through this pretty quick, and JB and Dave can fill in if I missed anything. I pulled this out of my notes this morning. So it's a 3-day meeting, right? And so on the first day, there was a lot of discussion about the lack of understanding and belief in the problem within the waterfowl management community, as well as I think the public. And I'll come back to that in a little bit. Tony Roberts, who's the NAWAMP coordinator, I guess, he said that he didn't feel like the Human Dimensions group was talking much about how the potential monitoring reductions are affecting users. And the NSST is very interested in collaboration regarding efficiencies, especially in habitat monitoring. So if you didn't see that paper that I sent out a couple of weeks ago, I guess, that the NSST just put together, it kind of really dovetailed really nicely with what the Harvest Management Working Group put out regarding potential cuts in monitoring. And it filled in some blanks, I think, in terms of things we'd be missing if that monitoring started to go away. So I sort of proposed, and maybe you can take notes of this, Oren, for the winter agenda, but I kind of proposed that the 4 flyways at our winter meetings, the Harvest Management Working Group members, the NSST reps, and the HDPET reps sit down for an hour or so, maybe however long it takes, probably an hour or so, and kind of compare notes and see how our 3 groups are approaching these potential reductions in monitoring, and seeing if there's anything that we can collaborate on there that might help the situation. So I'm going to kind of suggest that that's a thing maybe we could do as a evening session, or maybe I don't know who all that would entail, but maybe there's 4 or 5 of us that can get together and talk over a meal or something one night. One of the interesting things that came up was that there's some interest in possibly reverting to the same year reg cycle with the advent of the new regs process that Todd Sanders has been shepherding through. Boomer brought that up as Todd was talking, and some of the states in the room immediately went, well, now we've spent all this time, creating this new process. We don't know how easy it would be to go back. But it's something to think about, and maybe something we can talk about in the AHM meeting in February. So give that some thought. If your state is just in a place where you absolutely couldn't go back to a same year regulatory cycle, that's something to know. What's that, Wes? What is that?
Sorry, I'm playing with the stadium screen and JB sitting in front of me. Doug's back, so I'm being playful. My fault.
All right. So also, anybody who might be interested in using the 2-tier approach in their state, think about maybe volunteering to work on a study plan, because it looks like the pitch is going to be to try to have a study plan for whatever phase 2 looks like, ready for the SRC in October of 2025. And states who are really interested in this should think about how they would want to evaluate that. There was some concern that the SRC, if we didn't go in there with some kind of a plan, the SRC could force it into something unpleasant, like every state having to deal with it on their own, or a special season sort of approach. So be thinking about that as well. We spent most of the second day working on a set of straw man options for revising AHM, as well as a quick weighting exercise. I'll have more about that at the AHM committee meeting, because Boomer and Devers and a few others were still pulling those data together to put together a summary. And then on day 3, it was mostly updates. A lot of it was focusing on how Fish and Wildlife Service and also USGS, I guess, our contingency planning changes to monitoring. So I'll just run through a couple of them here. John Yeiser is examining how the Eastern surveys could be revisited or reduced without losing a ton of information. Kathy Fleming talked actually in great detail about the remarkable detective work she and her shop have been doing to track down the weird hunter harvest estimation problem. It looks like non-response bias is the culprit, and it's probably led to past estimates being low and current estimates biased high. So the current estimates seem really high because the past ones maybe are biased low. They're still digging into that, and there's going to be more information to come, but her presentation was very detailed and very impressive in terms of hunting that stuff down. Rachel Fern and John Yeiser are working on presented some work that they've been doing to remotely sense prairie habitat, and the pitfalls and difficulties they've found while trying to quantify wetland habitats in the prairie using remote sensing data. Ricky Burrell, who I think has talked to our flyway before, is working on a model of hunter dynamics and their influences on mallard populations and potentially on hunting regulations. And then the last thing I guess I'll mention, and then I'll kind of sum up, the communications committee that's chaired by Min wants to deal with misinformation in public forums, and that public forums is basically the Afton listserv. But it isn't clear how to how to do that really without sort of putting Boomer right in the firing line. So they're talking through that. The communications group is talking through that, and I wasn't at that meeting. JB was there, so maybe he has some more information on that. And then finally, I guess a couple of notes. There's no change to the priority list. That's probably not surprising. The 2-tier phase 2 planning has to get done in the relatively near future. We're going to have a joint small group session for the NSST, HD Pet, and Harvest Management Working Group reps to talk about monitoring. And finally, something that Boomer mentioned and him and Runge talked about a little bit at the very end of the meeting is that one of our big concerns, of course, has been that a reduction in monitoring could or maybe should result in reduced opportunity, more conservative regulations. And their position is that maybe isn't necessarily true because the models are using point estimates and don't really explicitly account for uncertainty. So as the uncertainty grows, it may not really affect the IPM all that much because the point estimate is the piece that's important in terms of how the model works. So I grabbed this stuff out of my notes really quick in the half an hour before I got on the call. So if I misinterpreted anything or misremembered anything, or if Dave or John thinks of something that I missed, chime in, please.
I think you hit the highlights of it, Adam. The one, I guess, one of the things that I remember most from the meeting was Conniff's presentation, and beyond all this, just the state that they are in, that in the next 3 to 5 years, 80% of their pilots are going to retire, and that there is really no plan in place or possible to replace those pilots. So I know that they said Ken or somebody, or Ken and Jerome were taking it to a higher level to just for the general, not for just waterfowl surveys, for every need, but losing all, I mean, they've had some pilot vacancies now that they can't seem to refill. Losing everybody at one time, it doesn't bode well for being able to fly.
Right, and he mentioned that you can't just hire a pilot. It takes 18 months to 2 years to get them through all of their hoops that they need to be certified to fly those low-level surveys. So it's not simply a matter of somebody retires and you replace them. There's a long overlap that's required. Good catch. I forgot about that.
I'll mention also, Adam, when you talked about, Kathy did an amazing detective job explaining the harvest information program, the issues of trying to figure out what's going on there. Well, Kathy's planning on retiring in April of 2025. So if you want to have a chance to engage with her more at this winter meeting, we should plan for that. I think you touched on all the important things. I know that we the reps, probably the whole Harvest Management Working Group, are except for maybe the central flyway, at least Rocco, are concerned about where the two tiers going to go without having a plan. So there'll be some time and energy and thought put into what phase two would look like, given that this was handed to the service in the last Trump administration, politically. So I think there might be, some hesitance to say no from SRC members. So we want to at least be thoughtful about what a phase two would look like. So that'll be something we'll be spending time on.
I had Kathy's impending retirement in my notes, but I didn't know if I was supposed to be spreading that yet, so I left it out. So I'm glad to hear you say that. Yeah, that's going to be a huge loss when Kathy leaves, and so hopefully we get a lot of this nailed down beforehand, because I don't know what hiring is going to look like in the new administration.
Yeah, we obviously expect there to be a hiring freeze for a while. Don't know the details. And I saw today that Suzanne Fellows, who's the chief of the duck stamp office, is retiring at the end of this month. That was news to me. So those kind of key vacancies are going to be, things that are going to be difficult to work around. We already have low capacity in DMBM. So anyhow, just giving you a heads up on what I know. Adam did a good job covering it. It was a good meeting.
Okay, thanks, guys. Any questions for Adam or John or Dave?
Just might add one thing based on what Dave just mentioned, fellows. For any of the states who, do not offer the e-duck stamp, I contacted her this month about the possibility of adding Kentucky as an e-duck stamp thing, and she said, no way, no how, no time soon. So maybe we got a little better reason why she said it was that emphatic about it. But any states that are, I kind of pushed it through our commission, got it already with thinking that we could do it. It's basically sounded like 24 months away or more at best. So if anybody were considering it, just know it's going to be a long time before it's an option for you.
Yeah, she was nicer to JB than she was to the reps after JB asked. But now today, finding out that she's leaving end of the month, that might have been part of the answer she didn't tell us.
Adam, I was a little unclear about what we might need on the winter, that our February agenda. I know you briefly mentioned that that the reps of the NSST, the Harvest Management Working Group, and the Human Dimensions Public Engagement Team might need to get together. But do you want time on our agenda for that, or is that something that would be those individual reps having a meeting outside of the larger group?
I think best case scenario would be if those of us who are on those groups could get together and talk through where we are before AHM meets. I know that might be a tall order. That would be probably the best. So I think we can do that. Maybe even, before the meeting on a Teams call or something. But certainly I don't think we need agenda time for it. I need probably give me an hour for AHM to bring everything up to speed and debrief on whatever Boomer sends me in the meantime. But I think that the other stuff we'll have to take care of informally.
Okay. That sounds good. Any questions or discussion about the Harvest Management Working Group? Hearing none, let's move quickly to the agenda for our upcoming winter meeting. I'm going to try to just share my draft agenda. Believe it or not, it's 2 months away. So it's coming up quick here. Is my Excel spreadsheet coming through?
Yep.
Okay, so committee chairs, please pay particular close attention here. Is this blown up enough? Can everybody see the timing and the various committees as they're laid out? Okay, thanks, Wes. So this is basically the same as it was for winter 24. I felt like we were pretty tight on winter 24, especially in the second half of our meeting. So I'm going to try to be a little more disciplined in terms of our agenda, the second half of the meeting. But committee chairs, what I need to know from you is if the time slots for your respective meetings, if you have enough time and if where you fall on the agenda is going to work for what you think you're going to have to discuss in February. So please begin thinking about this. I'll send this out via email in the near future. But what I really need is that committee chairs to start developing your agendas and communicating with me. Does anybody have any questions or suggestions for February agenda?
Hey, Oren, it's Adam. I know me and you and Jamie talked about the potential for an evening session. Is that the placeholder there on, what is that, Tuesday?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Yup. So if we can't get an academic in for an evening session, an alternative that I've been thinking about that I would welcome feedback on is, should we have the research committee as an evening session? Because the research committee now has 2 proposals to consider. And I think it would also be good for the group as a whole to discuss the research committee and the direction we want to go. So what Adam initially led with is I've invited Todd Arnold to come and talk about the information he released on the Afton listserv about his concerns about North American duck populations. So I've invited him to come and give us an evening seminar. He hasn't responded. So if Todd does come, that would be our evening seminar. But if he doesn't, I'm having trouble finding a time and a place for the research committee. So does anybody have any feedback on those 2 items or timing, etc.? Okay. Well, that's about all I had on the winter meeting, so I'll stop sharing. And I think that was about our agenda for today.
Oren, can I throw one last thing in there?
Of course, go ahead, John.
I apologize. I know Doug mentioned this earlier. Some of the invites and things for these meetings have been a bit of a disaster. I tried to create a list of everybody that from another email list, and some folks got left out or whatever. And so what I'm going to do at the end of this meeting is basically trash our old series of meeting invites and create a 2025 monthly meeting so that we'll have the latest folks. Because even when I take somebody off that's left us, somehow next month it sticks them back in. And so I need to just like trash this series, and we'll start a new series again on the 3rd Wednesday of every month. And we'll go from there. And as but so that you'll probably get a message that the meeting has been canceled, and then a later invite to a new series. So I apologize about that, but that's the only way I could think of is to try to get some of these old folks out and all the new folks that have contacted me in, and that kind of leads me to maybe just a you and me conversation, or however the group conversation at some point. How do we create a list that is maintained constant? Every time I send an email, 5 people send me can you add this person or that person? And I add them, and then maybe they were specific for that one meeting. How do we maintain these email conversations so that something like Doug getting left out. I had also left off Josh. Who else had I left off? Josh. So anyway, there were some important people that got left off, and I don't want to do that. So how do we do that? It's just not the best. I'm not really seeing the great way to do this.
Well, it's part of a larger issue, John. I don't think you're single-handedly responsible. I know I have my share as well. The problem is, now that we no longer have a direct way to measure membership in the Game Bird section, who is a member, and then who the email should go to is not a distinct group anymore. Historically, the procedures were set up that in order to be a member of the Game Bird text section and be on the email list, at least reliably on the email list, you had to maintain membership in the Game Bird text section by showing up at meetings and contributing money to, we had that membership that's set up. Maybe the wrong term here. But now that we no longer charge a nominal fee for membership, it's much less clear who is a member and how long they should be maintained on email distribution lists if they're not engaging with us or attending meetings. So it's John, this is not just your situation to apologize for. It's just a challenge of managing these email lists. And I think each of us as states have to take ownership and recognize we are tech reps and need to make sure that the people within our state that we want to be engaged in these discussions and on this flyway are on the email list and are receiving the emails and are engaging in these conversations. I think at the state and provincial level, tech reps know those people way better than the chairs that are constantly rotating in and out in the ever-changing email lists. That's where I'm at with it. Does that help, John?
Maybe. I just, again, I'll just apologize now if you feel like you don't get a message from me at some point, or somebody you think should get a message that is announcing these meetings, and then let me know and I'll try to get you added into my list. But it's just, I don't know. I just wonder if there's a quote unquote better way, because I have a list, you have a list, making sure that we're all on the same page is a bit of a challenge. Like I said, I don't know. My mind almost was that we created Excel. I mean, if everybody used the workspace, we had an Excel thing on the workspace that, hey, if you have somebody that you want included in the email list, you go to the workspace, you add them, and then each week before I email everybody, I just pull the list and pull the email addresses and send it. But yeah, I don't really trust that me being the top of the list would actually go to the workspace and keep that thing up to date either. So I don't know what the answer is. Sorry to ramble, but I just wanted to apologize for folks if, like I said, Doug got left off, and there were, again, been a number of people that got. Josh Dooley got me last week, and I hadn't been getting emails. So anyway, to everybody, I'm sorry if I hadn't been including you.
Well, it's just about 3 o'clock. I would seek a motion and a second to adjourn.
So moved.
Thanks, Adam.
Second. Peggy. Or
Good Lord, you people want to sit here all day?
Okay. Well, that concludes our meeting. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you all.
Happy New Year.
Good holidays, everybody.
Everybody enjoy your holidays.
Jamie even had a Christmas sweater on.
Well, hey, I was at the company Christmas party, and so I had to dip out a little bit early. So, yeah, I got my elf shirt on, and I got my beads.
You have help behind you, it appears.
I do. I dipped out and I drove home, and my cat is, he's taking care of business back there. So, anyway.
Awesome. Well, Merry Christmas, Jamie. We will.
Hey, man. Hey, I hope I didn't rub anybody the wrong. Well, I probably did. I probably pissed Mitch off a little bit, but with bringing up, did we talk to Doug Osborne about this? But yeah, I figured it was important that we needed to bring that up. So,
yeah, it's
Look.
just not true. I mean, we had to. I mean, he was here to be. Yeah, he was going to be not happy about it, so it was good for you to lay the groundwork.
Well, I think in the end it sounded, Doug didn't sound mad. He just was concerned because he didn't want his student getting scooped. But in the end, it sounds like they're just gonna talk and iron this out, and hopefully everything's gonna be okay. So, but yeah. So all good. I like it. I mean, I like Mitch's proposal. It's really ambitious. It's like, no, hey, like we're gonna start in January. We're gonna be done in June. That's pretty dang impressive. So
yeah,
anyway.
Yeah, anyway, you have a rock star postdoc and a master student who's who's just learning. So I don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, it may not work that we can do it in his funding timeline or whatever. So anyway, I just think we've been asking for this forever and ever. And Doug has been sitting there forever and ever listening to us talk about this.
Yeah.
And has not jumped in and said, hey, I'm able to take this home. So
right. Yeah. But
Houston, what are you doing, man? You still in there?
Yeah, gonna have to get. We talked a little bit about it. Gonna have to get some kind of public release out just about the dead birds falling from the sky. So I'm kind of doing that on the side here.
I don't know. While we were talking, I guess our media person said that somebody in Louisiana is hospitalized with severe bird flu from backyard stuff. So I guess I missed if Stolnick said that. So bad news.
Yeah, it's really funny because yesterday emails went around about, hey, we probably ought to put out a press release because Kentucky put out a press release. So we took your press release and we were like, okay, yeah, we're just going to have to do ours now. So thanks.